Hello. Okay. Hi. This video is basically a walkthrough of setting up Reverb in UE4. This version I'm on right now is 425, and that means it's using the audio mixer, which is the new audio engine that became the default audio engine in 424. If you're working on a previous version, then some of this stuff might be different looking. A lot of the steps are the same, but it might be different looking. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because setting up Reverb it just has many steps. It's not complicated, and it's usually something that you set up. Uh, it's usually something that once you are familiar with all the steps, it's pretty fast to set up and it's pretty fast to edit and so on. But if you've never done it before, then it can be a little confusing, especially if you miss a step and you're like, hey, the reverb's not working. And I tend to answer this question, my reverb is not working, why, a lot. And usually it's just me listing a checklist of the steps. So here I have the third person template map. It's just the default template. You can make that from the project wizard. And over here I have a sound that we'll be using. This is Aaron, my boss, playing flugelhorn. I recorded him playing flugelhorn the other day for some reverb demos. So we'll just be using that sound. Why not? Okay. So I'll try to make this quick. But essentially, the way that just a sort of broad overview of Master Reverb, the way that it works in the engine. It's called Master Reverb. Personally, I like to call it environmental reverb. And the reason I like to call it that is because there are other reverb effects that you can create in Unreal, especially as of 425. And so these effects are not always going to behave like the master reverb. There are ways to make them behave that way in 425, but that's sort of, we're not going to get into that. This is the basics, basically. So we're just going to try to keep it simple. But I want you to sort of appreciate the way that what is environmental reverb for? Environmental reverb is basically attempting to simulate the reverberation in a space inside of your game. That's the idea of the way that the master reverb functions. Is basically trying to create, like, it's attempting to do a simple model of reverb inside of a physical space. There are other reasons to have reverb. There are aesthetic reasons to have reverb, and you can set up reverb to do those things, and you can create your own custom reverb effects inside the engine that don't interact with the master reverb system. But the reason I try to frame it that way is because it's really about, say, like, for example, this room or whatever you want to call it. If we were making sound inside this room, the sound would bounce off all the walls and all of these, the stairs and all this sort of stuff, and reverberate and echo around the space, and it's kind of like ripples inside of a pond, and they become sort of like noisy waves after a while, right? That's what reverb is like. And so the way that the master reverb system works is a sound is opted into Reverb Send, and the Reverb Send is essentially duplicating the sound and diverting that copy to a reverb process. We call it sending. You can think of it almost like a pipe, as like you've put a joint in a pipe, and now the pipe water is split. The only difference is that we're actually making a copy of the sound. So 100% of the sound still comes out as normal, and then an additional percentage of the sound goes to reverb. So we'll be applying it to our little flugelhorn. Okay. Now, first thing we want to do is set up our sound class. So I'm going to add a sound class, my sound class. Now I'm adding my own sound class. There are sound classes that come with, that are part of the engine content, but I think it's better to create your own sound class and sound class graph for your project. That way it's yours and it's set up the way you want it to be set up. Okay, so if I go into my sound class, we will have, here's the graph. Now the graph is actually a tree. And some of these parameters, not all of them, some of the parameters are actually inherited by the children classes. But I would not worry about that right now. Right now, we just want to get reverb working. So if we scroll down to this area right here, in 425, it will look like this. Some of these have been reorganized, so if you're on a previous version, it might look different. And you'll see this send to master reverb submix. Set to true. Send to master reverb submix. That's what we want. We want to make sure our sound is sending to our master reverb. Okay. The previous versions of this might say something like apply reverb, and it's just a checkbox or something like that. But we want to make sure that's checked. Now by default, it's true, but we want to double check, especially if our reverb's not working. Now, there are two different types of sounds that play. You have 2D sounds and you have 3D sounds. And the big difference between them is that a 3D sound has attenuation settings and a 2D sound does not. Now, attenuation settings contain settings and parameters to set how a sound spatializes in 3D space, but you don't have to have spatialization actually applied on a 3D sound. It just has to have attenuation. So if you're just playing a sound in the world and you're not applying attenuation settings, this is one of the most common ways that people do not hear reverb, is that this is set to 0. And what that means is this is a scalar that 0% of the audio is getting sent. So whatever audio is copied to get sent to the reverb, because we've got this checkbox set to true, whatever amount, whatever the final volume of that sound is, based on all the different ways you can apply volume, whatever that is, we're going to multiply it by 0, and then that's going to get sent to reverb. And multiplying it by 0 obviously means nothing gets sent to reverb. So for our sake, let's just set that to 1. So that's like basically 100% of the sound that is copied over to sent to reverb will get sent to reverb. And we'll just get saved on that. All right, now in our sound, we're going to make this a looping sound so we can continue to audition it if we need to for whatever reason. And then see here, the default master class is set to master. The default class is a project setting, and you can change what it defaults to. But right now, we just want to switch this over to use our sound class. All right. Cool. Now let's switch over to our level. Now, because this master reverb is like an environmental reverb, it's attached to the environment. So there are two main ways that you basically activate reverb. One of those is in the world settings. So the world settings, as we hear, are settings. Let me make sure this is visible on screen. I have an ultra-wide monitor. The world settings are settings that are part of our persistent level. So these actually are owned by our persistent level. If we scroll down, we can see under audio that there are options that are related to reverb. We have apply reverb, that's defaulting to true, that's fine. And then reverb effect is nothing here. And then you see reverb plugin effect. And this is something that we might get rid of because it's confusing. But this is actually, the plugin is a third-party plugin. So if you're using native reverb, which is what this walkthrough is about, then you just can ignore this plugin effect and just care about this. And then you see we have volume and fade time. The volume is another scalar, right? So we had that in our sound class. We had the scalar that was we set to 1, and this is another scalar that will get applied. And here I've set it to 1. The default, if you click the little yellow arrow, is half, but we want to make it 1 for just to make reverb really obvious. And the fade time is how long it takes for this setting to take effect. And that's useful for transitioning from different reverb effect settings as you're moving through space, say. And that's the other way we can apply reverb, the other main way, and that's with audio volumes. So if I type audio volume, I can place an audio volume in the world, and you'll see on its detail panels that it has reverb settings with all the same stuff there, right? So we'll get to audio volumes in a little bit. I'm just going to delete that for now. All right, so we need a reverb effect setting. Let's make one. Okay, so here I'm going to right-click to Sounds, and then under Effects, we see Reverb Effect. My master reverb effect. And this is a data asset that contains, let's do this, a data asset that contains parameters relating to reverb. Now, this is a particularly complicated list of parameters, and don't feel too confused by this. I mean, because it's confusing. I'm just going to lay it out there. There are definitely simpler reverb effects. This list is part of a legacy reverb effect parameter list that they were actually part of Microsoft's Xaudio 2 reverb, and because even though this is using the new native plate reverb, these settings were preserved because it just there had to be something for people who were upgrading their projects. The reverb still had to work essentially. So these settings have stuck around. What I recommend is if you're new to this or you're confused by this, is to just, once you get reverb working, just to mess around with one value at a time to get a sense of what these mean, these terms. Because ultimately, it's really about how it sounds. And if you like the way it sounds, then it's working. And if you don't like the way it sounds, then something needs to change. Okay. What I will do is I will change the gain to 1, which means that it's basically it'll output at maximum volume. So I'm going to hit save there. All right. So now I have a reverb effect, and going back to my world settings, let me drop my my little flugelhorn playing into the level. I'll just put it right here. And it's a 2D sound, so if I hit play, you'll hear that the sound doesn't pan, and it doesn't get quieter as I walk away. So it's a 2D sound, right? But we put in our sound class, remember that we put in our sound class that our 2D send amount is 1, so 100% basically. So now let's add our reverb effect, okay, to the world settings. So that means it's for the whole level. And you can actually see I have this stat command, a console command called stat sound reverb, and I'll show you how to turn that on and off. But right now I have it on, and you can see that now my reverb has taken effect. If I hit play, there we go. Now reverb is working, right? Cool. Let's use the audio volume as another example. So I'm going to put it somewhere obvious right here, maybe on that block. And then going to its details, similarly, I'm going to apply my reverb setting, and I'm going to set the volume to 1, so it's the most obvious it can be. I'm going to hit play. Now, we don't have reverb. Now, the way that the audio volume works is you can see now I have the pawn inside the volume, still no reverb. Because the way that the reverb works when it's audio volumes is the audio volume takes effect when the listener object, which is by default on the camera, goes inside the bounds of the reverb of the audio volume box. So as you can see, is if I move my camera inside the box, now you can see my debug now indicates my master reverb effect as being effect, and then when I go out, it goes none. It goes back to none. So if I hit play and I just swing the camera over the block, now we've got reverb. Cool. All right. So that's how the audio volumes work. You can also apply reverb in a blueprint if you want to go crazy. This is sort of a bonus. So here I have the level blueprint. We'll go on begin play. And then we have set reverb effects, I think is the parameter. Wait, it's activate reverb effect. There we go. Activate the reverb effect, and you'll see a lot of the same parameters, right? Volume, priority. We haven't talked about priority yet. And then the reverb effect. And it's just one of these, right? And there's all the engine defaults, and then there's my master reverb effect. And then you can also deactivate it. Similarly, deactivate. You can give it a tag, so you can, when you deactivate it, you can deactivate it by the tag. Neat. Okay. Now, going back to our audio volume, you'll notice that audio volumes also have a priority parameter, and that's because audio volumes can be nested within other audio volumes. So the audio volume settings that will win is the one with the highest priority that you're inside of. So obviously, if you can nest audio volumes, you can be inside many audio volumes at once. But whichever audio volume has the highest priority, those are the settings that will be used. And that's useful if, say, for example, you have a world where you have like a big room and a little room inside of that big room. And when you go inside the little room, you want different reverb settings than when you're outside in the big room. And that's basically the reason for that. What you will find in general is that the smaller your volume, usually the higher priority you want it to be. That's generally the case. But yeah, you can do it however you want. Okay, so now let's talk about 3D. So this was a 2D sound. We've added reverb to a 2D sound. Now we'll make this sound a 3D sound. And there are a couple different ways of doing that. If we go to our ambient sound actor here, ambient sound actor has an audio component on it. And the audio component contains the ability to turn spatialization on and off. That means it can make a 3D sound 2D. So it can override the attenuation settings. It can override it on the instance, or apply attenuation settings, which are another data asset type. That's just attenuation settings. And what I would say is that be very careful about how you override. I would avoid using overrides. I would override usually only in the case of an instance inside the world where you're like, this case, I want to make an exception. If you have a whole bunch of stuff and you're overriding stuff the same way, if you're overriding 2 audio components and you're doing it the same way, make a settings asset and don't override, because it's just going to get confusing and it's going to get harder to change, and it's a mess. Assets are the best way to go. They're just always going to be cleaner in the long run. It may seem really fast to override here because I can just go boop, and now I have attenuation. See, now it's 3D sound. See, it's panning. But it's sort of a trap because it's convenient, but it will bite you later on. So let's make an asset. Go down to sound attenuation, my sound attenuation. And if we look at the list here, there are quite a lot of parameters that relate to how the sound is affected or changes based on how far away it is from you or how it pans around you. By default, you'll notice if we scroll down, the Reverb Send is already active, so it's already enabled. Because we assume if it's 3D sound, it's like a sound inside the world, and then obviously an environmental reverb makes a lot of sense. So here, enable Reverb Send is automatically set to true, but you can always check it, make sure it is. And then we have this really cool thing that's only available in the audio mixer. It's not in any of the older implementations of reverb, and that is a send amount that is scaled by distance. And this can be very powerful, and I'll show you how that can affect the perception of your sound in space. But think about how reverb is basically the sound bouncing off everything in the world, and just like ripples in a pond, the farther you are away from the beginning of that ripple, the more muddled the waves look, the little ripples. And because they've bounced off the edges of the pond and they've come back, and you've got these little miniature waves. In that same way, there's more clarity in the sound when you're closer to something, and the sound feels more reverberant when you're farther away, right? And so controlling how much reverb you send based on distance can be a really powerful way to do this. So we have a min send level and a max send level, a min send distance and a max send distance. A simple map. And at the minimum distance and under, it will send 0.3, and at the maximum distance and over, it will send 0.95. So that's another scalar, right, on top of the other things. So this is how much of the sound is actually getting sent to our reverb. So let's do this. In my level, instead of having this ambient sound actor, I'm going to put a sphere in the level. Just a simple sphere. This will help me visually see where the sound is in space. And then I'm going to add a component onto that instance of that sphere, an audio component. Cool. And I want it to play my my sound. So we'll play my sound. Aaron's playing. Hit save, so it's there. And then on my attenuation, those spheres are about 100 units in diameter, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 50, a distance of 50 units. And then if I go to my level and I go boop, and I look at the top view, I'm going to look at the maximum distance I can be away from that sphere. It's about 2250, 2260. Let's just give it a nice 2200. And so on my max distance for this room, 2200 units is as far away as I can get. And so now I have really fine control. If I'm really close to it, maybe I'll send something much lower. I'll send like, say, 10%. And then when I'm maximum distance away, it's 100%. All right, so let's save this. And we will add this. Now we'll set this attenuation setting on our sound. Okay, so we're going to associate our sound with this attenuation setting instead of using overrides. Cool. So now our sound is 3D. So if we go back, now our sound is 3D. This is what we expect. Cool. Now let's add to our world settings, we'll add my reverb effect. Boom. And we'll hit play. Now it's reverberated. If I get close to the sphere, it's not sending as much to reverb. It's not as reverberant. Now if I get really far away, it sounds much more diffused. It's filling the space. All right. So that's just a basic walkthrough of getting 2D reverb and 3D reverb set up in your game in UE4. And as you can see, the distance-based send can be a really powerful and simple way to make things feel, give basically your sounds depth inside the world. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope that I can just post this video instead of answering the question, why can't I hear reverb? That's my hope. Hopefully this worked. Thanks.